The last real conversation I had in Medellín, the night before I left the last time, was on a rooftop in Laureles, past midnight, with a woman I'd been seeing for about 6 weeks, and she said something that stuck with me ever since. She said, "You know we can always tell, right? The ones who came here to find something in themselves, and the ones who came here to buy something." She wasn't angry when she said it. She was almost gentle about it, and it landed on me all at once that she'd been reading me the entire time we'd known each other, patiently, quietly, trying to figure out which kind of man I was. The whole time I'd flattered myself that I was the one doing the observing. That's the thing nobody tells you about dating in this city. You think you're the one reading the room. You're not. You are being read, constantly and expertly, by people who have watched 100 versions of you get off that plane at Jose Maria Cordova with the same look on your face. I'm Luke. I've spent the last 7 years moving between cities in Latin America and roughly 18 months of that, on and off across several stays, in Medellín. This is not going to be a video about how to win here, because I don't believe that's a real thing, and in my experience, the men who talk like it is are usually the ones getting taken for the most. This is about what dating in Medellín is actually like underneath the version you see on Instagram. The economics running under all of it, the roles 2 people fall into without ever deciding to, the mistakes I made that cost me real money and real time, and what I've come to think it genuinely takes to have something real here, instead of something you're only renting and calling love. If you're considering doing something like this yourself, or you're just curious what it's honestly like, please subscribe, because I'm somewhere different every few months, and I try to tell the truth about all of it, including the parts that don't make me look good. Let me start with why I kept coming back. By the time of that last stay, I'd already done Medellín twice. The first time, back in 2019, I did exactly what everyone does. I rented an apartment in Provenza, 1 bedroom, glass tower, rooftop pool, $1,400 a month, which felt like a steal coming from Denver, and which I now know was roughly triple what my Colombian neighbors 2 streets over were paying for more space. I ate at the restaurants with English menus and photos of the food. I drank at the bars around Parque Laris, where everyone speaks just enough English to sell you something, and I had what I thought at the time was an incredible 3 months, and what I now understand was 3 months inside a very expensive, very well-lit bubble that had been built, deliberately and profitably, for people exactly like me. So the last time, I did it differently on purpose. I took a place in Laureles instead. Quieter, greener, more families on the sidewalks, far fewer foreigners, about $900 a month for something comparable, partly to save money. But mostly because I'd finally understood that the Medellín they sell to gringos and the Medellín paisas actually live in are 2 different cities stacked on top of each other, and I wanted to spend time in the second one before I decided I knew anything about the place. First impression, both times, is the warmth. Everybody tells you this, and it's true. People here are open in a way that's genuinely disarming if you're coming from the United States, where a stranger holding eye contact reads as a low-grade threat. Women will meet your gaze and hold it, laugh easily, touch your forearm when they're making a point. And here's the very first thing I got completely wrong, and that I now watch every single new arrival get wrong the same way. I read that warmth as personal, as being about me, specifically. It isn't. Or it isn't only that. Paisa culture is warm the way some cultures are cold. It's the baseline, the room temperature, the eye contact, the physical ease, the flirtatiousness even. A lot of that is simply how people are with everyone, including their aunt and the man who sells them arepas on the corner. And when you're a lonely foreigner who just walked away from an entire life, you are exquisitely primed to misread ambient friendliness as specific interest. I spent most of my first month there mistaking basic courtesy for chemistry, and I embarrassed myself more than once doing it. There was a woman at a cafe near my place in Laureles who I went to most mornings, worked the counter, always warm, always remembered my order, always had a little joke ready, and I spent the better part of 2 weeks quietly convinced this was becoming something. I finally worked up the nerve to ask if she'd want to get a drink sometime, and she was completely lovely about it and completely uninterested, and it came out that she was engaged, and it came out that she was exactly that warm with the 80-year-old man who shuffled in after me every single day too. I wanted to evaporate, but honestly, it was one of the most useful humiliations of my life, because it recalibrated me on the spot. That wasn't a signal. That was just her being paisa. The warmth wasn't a message meant for me. It was the weather. Which is the actually useful version of that lesson. In Medellín, the signal-to-noise ratio on interest is different from what you're used to. The warmth is real, but it's turned all the way up for everyone, which means it tells you far less than it would back home. You have to recalibrate. The stuff that genuinely indicates someone is interested in you specifically is quieter and slower than the loud, warm surface. And if you can't tell the difference, you'll either chase people who are only ever being kind, or you'll conclude that everyone's into you, which is its own delusion, and frankly, the more embarrassing of the two. That recalibration took me longer than I'd like to admit, and it's really just the entry-level version of the much bigger thing I want to talk about, the part running underneath all of it, which is the money. Here's what I mean. The first time a woman I was seeing in Medellín let me pay for a nice dinner, this was that first trip in 2019, I didn't think twice about it. Back in the US, I'd have split it or traded off without a second thought, but the place I'd picked was a genuinely nice restaurant in El Poblado. The bill came to something like 200,000 pesos, maybe $50, absolutely nothing to me. And I paid it without a flicker, and I felt good about it, generous, like a man. What I did not understand is what $50 means on the other side of that table. For a lot of people here, that one dinner is a meaningful slice of a week's wages. And by paying it without a thought, by choosing that restaurant in the first place, I hadn't just bought a meal. I'd broadcast a signal about who I was and what I was offering. And I'd quietly established a dynamic in which I was the resource and she was the recipient. I didn't decide to do that. I did it by accident because I was reading the whole scene through American eyes where $50 is a rounding error, and she was reading it through Paisa eyes where it very much is not. That gap, that single gap, sits underneath nearly everything about dating here as a foreigner, and almost nobody discusses it honestly. The men who come to Medellín love to talk about how the women are more feminine, more warm, more traditional, more attentive. What they don't want to look at directly is that a huge amount of what they're experiencing is the specific shape a large economic asymmetry takes when nobody's willing to name it. When one person has, by local standards, functionally unlimited money, and the other doesn't, it bends everything in the room. It bends who suggests what. It bends how grateful someone appears. It bends what behavior gets tolerated, and for how long. And if you refuse to see it, if you insist to yourself that it's all pure chemistry and feminine energy and old-world values, you make yourself absurdly easy to take advantage of, because you've deliberately blinded yourself to half of what's actually driving the situation. And the apps concentrate the whole thing and make it worse. Open Tinder or Bumble in Medellín as a foreign guy and the sheer volume is disorienting. It feels like proof of something about you. It isn't. A foreign profile in a city with a wide income gap is a kind of lottery ticket, and the funnel selects hard on both ends for people oriented toward exactly that. I'm not saying nobody real is on there. I met people I genuinely liked through apps. I'm saying the raw abundance is not the compliment it feels like at 2 in the morning. It's a feature of the economics, not a feature of you. Guys who don't understand that spend a year mistaking a distorted funnel for their own magnetism, and it quietly wrecks their grip on reality. I actually learned most of this from a friend, not a girlfriend. Her name's Manuela, a Paisa woman, an architect. I met her through a co-working space in Laureles, and we've never been anything but friends, which is precisely why she'd tell me the truth. One night, I was complaining to her about not being able to figure out who was actually interested in me versus who wasn't. And she laughed and said something like, "Luke, half of them like you fine, but you're also a foreigner with dollars, in a country where that means a great deal, and pretending it isn't part of it is a luxury only you can afford. She can't afford to ignore it, so why do you get to?" That reframed the entire thing for me, because I'd been walking around treating the honest question as, does she like me, or is she using me? As if those were the only two options on the menu, and as if I were the innocent party running a detector for cons. And Manuela's whole point was that this framing was itself a fantasy. The real situation was simpler and less flattering. There's an enormous economic gap, everyone in the room can see it, and the question is not whether it's part of the dynamic. It is part of the dynamic, always. That's just physics. The only real question is whether the two of you are being honest about it, or both quietly pretending it isn't there. And it's the pretending that rots it. That's when people start playing roles. She plays the grateful, doting local woman. You play the generous provider who's finally found something he couldn't get back home. And you can run that script for months. It feels exactly like a relationship. It's really two people performing for each other across a gap neither one will say out loud. Go watch the guys in Provenza on a Friday sometime, and you'll see the performance happening live. There's a specific posture a certain kind of foreign man takes on, a little lord of the manor, expansive, buying the whole table another round. And the entire time you can see he believes the exchange rate is a personality. He thinks being wealthy by comparison has made him more desirable, when what it has actually done is make it flat out impossible for him to know whether he's desirable at all, because he's removed the only conditions under which he'd ever find out. I want to know, how many of you watching this are seriously thinking about doing something like this? Not just Medellín, anywhere. Drop the city you've got in your head down in the comments. I read all of them, and honestly, it's the most interesting part of running this whole channel, seeing where everybody's looking. Now let me tell you about the most expensive version of getting this wrong, which is, of course, mine. Her name was Catalina. This was during a longer Medellín stay, and we were together about 7 months. I'm going to be honest with you, in a way that doesn't flatter me, because that's the only version of this story that's worth anything to you. Catalina did take advantage of me financially. By the end of it, I'd covered rent that was never mine, a family emergency I later had real reason to doubt, a phone, a laptop, more dinners than I could count, and a loan we both understood was never going to be a loan. Added up and it's somewhere north of $8,000 over 7 months. So yes, on paper, I got played, cleanly. But here's the part that the guys who tell this kind of story always leave out. And leaving it out is exactly how they walk away having learned nothing. I set that up. Not on purpose, but I walked into that relationship starving to be needed. I'd come out of a life in the States where I'd been left, where I'd felt disposable, and some part of me absolutely loved being the guy who could fix a problem, who could make it disappear with a bank transfer, who was so obviously the strong and stable one. That was my fantasy, the one I'd carried down there in my luggage. And Catalina, whatever else was true about her, read that fantasy in about a week and handed me exactly the role I'd been auditioning for. I wanted to be the provider and the rescuer. She let me be the provider and the rescuer. We had a deal. It just wasn't the deal I'd been telling myself we had. I remember the exact night I should have known. About 4 months in, Catalina told me her landlord was threatening to evict her. Her mother was sick, she'd fallen behind. It was 2 million pesos. And she was crying while she told me. And I want to be clear, I don't know to this day how much of that was true. Some of it may well have been. But what I remember with total clarity is that my very first feeling, before sympathy even arrived, was something almost like relief. Because here was a problem I could solve. Here was my role, right on cue. I transferred the money before she'd finished the sentence, and I felt more like a man in that moment than I had in years. And that should have terrified me. The speed of it, the eagerness. That wasn't love. That was me feeding something starving in myself, and she'd found the feeder and pressed it. But let's be honest, I pressed it too. So the lesson I took from Catalina is not Colombian women will take your money. That's the lesson men reach for when they want to feel like victims and stay stupid forever. The women I've known in Medellín are individuals, full stop. And smearing $8,000 of my own bad judgment across an entire nationality would be both a lie and a very convenient way to make sure I never had to examine my own part in it. The real lesson is narrower and far more useful. The fantasy of being the rescuer is the thing that got me robbed, the wanting to be needed. That's the specific vulnerability someone hooks into, and I brought it with me. It had nothing to do with Colombia. Medellín simply gave it an extraordinarily efficient place to express itself because the economic gap made rescuing so easy and so cheap feeling that I could pour myself into it for months without ever noticing how much was quietly flowing out the door. I watch other foreigners make first cousins of that same mistake constantly. The most common one is the menu mentality. Guys who come here and treat the women of an entire city as an all-you-can-eat situation, swiping and stacking dates, genuinely convinced that because they can, they're winning at something. What they can't see is that the very thing making it all so easy, the money, the novelty of being foreign, the apps overflowing with people, is the same thing that guarantees none of it was ever earned, which means none of it tells them a single true thing about themselves, which is almost always the thing they actually flew down here starving to learn. They came to feel wanted, and they built themselves a machine that makes it impossible to ever know if they are. And then there's the guy who does 6 weeks in El Poblado and flies home an expert. You've met this guy, or you've been this guy. I have been this guy. He comes back and he's got the entire country diagnosed. The women there are like this, the men there are like that. And the tell, every single time, is the generalization itself. Because when you actually come to know people here as people, when you've had a paisa friend look you in the eye and tell you you're being an idiot, when you've been sincerely liked by one person and coldly lied to by another, and had to sit with the fact that both of them were individuals and not data points, you slowly lose the ability to talk in those clean, sweeping sentences at all. The confidence of the sweeping statement is a confession. It means you only ever met the category. You never once met the people. So what actually works? And I want to be careful here, because the second I say what works, it starts to sound like a technique, and the entire point is that it isn't one. But there are things I do differently now, and they've made my life in Medellín better in ways that have nothing to do with any particular woman. The first is the money, and it's simple to say and genuinely hard to do. Deal with it honestly, out loud, early. I don't perform wealth anymore. No Lord of the Manor routine, no picking the most expensive room in the building to signal what I am, and, just as importantly, I don't perform poverty either, pretending the gap doesn't exist, which is its own dishonest little move in the other direction. I just try to be a normal person about it. Early on with someone I'll suggest splitting things, or trading off, or picking places that aren't a statement about anything. Not because $50 matters to me, but precisely because it might matter a great deal to her, and I would much rather find out who she actually is when I'm not standing there pressing an enormous financial thumb on the scale. You learn a staggering amount about a person by not being their sponsor. You give them the room to actually want you, or not, instead of wanting the situation you represent. The second thing, and I cannot possibly overstate this, is learn the language. Real Spanish, not restaurant Spanish. For my entire first year in Latin America, I scraped by on almost nothing, and I did not understand until much later that this had quietly caged me. When you can't speak the language, the only people you can date are the ones who already speak yours. And in Medellín, the women who speak fluent English are a specific and narrow slice of the city, disproportionately the ones who've made a kind of project out of foreigners, for reasons both innocent and not. Every gringo who can't hold a real conversation in Spanish is dating out of that tiny pool and quietly assuming it's the whole city. I can point to the exact stretch when this finally clicked for me. Somewhere in my second year, my Spanish crossed the line from surviving to actually living, and I remember a night at a friend's apartment in Laureles, a house party, all paisas, no English happening anywhere in the room, and I was standing in the middle of a genuine argument about a football match, talking trash, getting trash talked right back, fully a person in that room. There was a woman there I ended up talking to for 3 hours, and not once did the fact that I was foreign do any of the work for me. She wasn't interested in a gringo. She was, maybe, interested in me, and for the first time in my life down there, I could actually tell the difference. That evening could never have happened in English. In English, I'd have been right back in the bubble, dating the one narrow slice of the city that had been set up to date me. Language is the door. Almost everything good is on the far side of it, and almost every miserable guy I've met here never once opened it. The third thing is the one that sounds the softest and turns out to matter the most. Build a real life, so that you're not dating out of loneliness. Nearly all of my worst decisions in Medellín, Catalina included, happened in the stretches when a relationship was the only thing I had going. When I'd land in the city and the woman instantly became my entire social life, my sense of purpose, my only reason to leave the apartment, that's exactly when I got needy. And needy is when you get taken, and needy is also just a genuinely bad way to move through the world. The stays that went well were the ones where I had the co-working crowd, a climbing gym out in Envigado, a Sunday football game, friends like Manuela who'd tell me the truth to my face. When your life is already full, you stop auditioning people for the role of saving you, because that role simply doesn't exist anymore. And, strangely, that is also precisely when people start getting interested, because there is nobody on this earth actually drawn to the man who needs them to supply the meaning in his life. If I had to describe the kind of man who does well here versus the kind who crashes and burns, it has almost nothing to do with looks or money or game. The ones who crash are running from something and using the city and the people in it as medication. The exchange rate lets them feel, temporarily, like the thing that's broken in them isn't really broken. And the bill for that always comes due. In money or in years. The ones who do well came to actually live somewhere, treat the people they meet as people they might genuinely come to know, and would honestly rather have one real connection they had to earn than 50 they didn't. That man has a wonderful life in Medellín. He also, and this is sort of the whole secret, would have built a good life just about anywhere. So here's what nobody tells you, all the way down at the bottom of it. The quality of your experience dating in Medellín is, more than anything else, a mirror. The city is not a cheat code, and the women are not a category you can decode and then unlock. There is real warmth here, and there is a real economic gap running underneath all of it, and the two are tangled together in ways that reward honesty and punish fantasy, brutally, and sometimes expensively. If you come down here as a whole person, with a life, willing to see individuals instead of a type, and willing to handle the money like an adult, you can build something genuinely good, maybe better than whatever you left behind. And if you come down here to buy your way out of feeling small, the city will happily sell you that, over and over, right up until the day you finally notice it never once worked. That woman on the rooftop in Laureles was right. They can always tell which one you are. The uncomfortable part was never that they're watching, it's that most guys don't actually know the answer themselves. And Medellín has a way of telling you, whether you were ready to hear it or not. If you got something from this, hit subscribe. I'm in a different city every few months, and the next few videos get into what this life actually costs. The money, the loneliness, the stuff the highlight reels quietly leave out. See you on the road.